The Galaxy Council had always seen humans as the new ones, the late arrivals who came too fast and too strong, the ones who built ships that could cross light years while others debated for centuries about the ethics of faster travel. Humanity entered the galactic stage less than 200 years ago, and from the start there was tension. The council members were ancient, slow-thinking species that valued balance and quiet control. They had long decided how much power each race should have, and when humans refused to stay in their assigned corner, things began to change. At first it was small, quiet meetings between ambassadors. The human representative, Laura Bennett, spoke with calm words and a steady tone. She warned the council that Earth needed fair treatment, that trade sanctions and restricted routes were unfair. They nodded, smiled, and then voted against her in every session. It was not just politics. It was contempt. Humans were too loud, too fast, too emotional for the old races who ruled the stars. Yet humanity grew anyway. Colonies on distant worlds thrived. Human scientists shared medicine that saved millions of alien lives. Human engineers repaired ships and built orbital cities that dwarfed those of their neighbors. Some races respected them for it. Others felt threatened. When a trade war started between two powerful species, humans offered aid shipments to both sides, trying to ease the conflict. The council declared it interference and fined Earth billions. That was the first real crack. Laura tried to reason with them, but her words met silence. On Earth, people grew angry. They called it the Quiet War, a war of laws and lies where every council decree made humanity bleed without a shot fired. Even then, the humans held back. They believed in cooperation even if it hurt. Then came the day of the embargo. The council voted to suspend all human travel beyond the Sol border for 5 years, claiming it was for security reasons. In truth, it was fear. Human ships carried too much influence. They built faster, smarter, and cheaper than anyone else. If that growth continued, the balance of the council would break. Laura sat in the great chamber when the vote passed. She stood, her face pale, her voice soft but firm. She said humanity would remember. The chamber was silent as her image broadcast back to Earth, to the colonies, to every human outpost. And humanity did remember. A month later, a cargo ship named Horizon Dawn was seized by patrol vessels from the Therax Dominion, acting under council orders. The crew was taken, the cargo confiscated, and the captain, Daniel Brooks, was killed during a so-called inspection. The news reached Earth and spread like wildfire. Daniel had been a veteran explorer, one of the first to map the Perseus corridor. He was well-loved, respected. His death broke the restraint that had held for so long. In the days that followed, protests filled the skies of Earth's cities. The colonies refused to comply with council restrictions. Human freighters began flying without council permission, escorted by armed ships. The council called them criminals. Humanity called them heroes. In a small room deep beneath Washington Base, a meeting took place. Laura Bennett was there, along with Admiral Scott Hayes and President Ellen Ward. They sat in silence for a long time. Outside, rain fell across the Capitol dome, lightning flashing beyond the windows. Finally, Ellen spoke. She said enough was enough. For 2 centuries, humanity had followed the rules, respected the council, tried to fit into their system, but the system was never made for humans. It was made to control them. Scott agreed. He had seen fleets held back, supplies denied, lives lost because of council policy. Laura looked between them and asked what they planned to do. Ellen's voice was calm as she said they would no longer bow. She gave the order to rearm the border fleets. The message went out to every human world: prepare for independence. Across the colonies, the reaction was immediate. Miners on Ceres laid down their tools and volunteered for defense. Scientists on Europa reprogrammed survey drones into scouts. Students on Mars joined training camps. On the outer worlds, small militia ships painted their hulls with Earth's blue and white colors. No one wanted war, but everyone was ready. For the first time in centuries, humanity stood united not under fear, but under anger and pride. The council tried to respond quickly. They sent messages, warnings, and threats. They demanded that the fleet stand down. But the messages went unanswered. The council had crossed a line, and they knew it. Their arrogance had blinded them. In the great chamber, the alien delegates argued among themselves. The Velnar representative shouted that humans were dangerous. The Sarathi delegate urged negotiation, but few listened. The Therax Dominion demanded immediate military action. Finally, the council approved a joint task force to patrol human space. It was meant to show force, to remind humanity of its place. They expected humans to back down as they always had. They were wrong. When the task force entered the Sol boundary, they found human defense ships waiting. The flagship, the Liberty Dawn, sent a transmission. Its captain, Aaron Blake, spoke plainly. He said the Council had lost its moral right to command humanity, and from this day forward, no foreign fleet would enter human space uninvited. The Council fleet commander ordered him to stand down. Aaron refused. The first shots of the new war were not fired in rage but in certainty. The Liberty Dawn's railguns roared across the void, and the Council ships learned what human weapons could do. In minutes, half their force was disabled, the rest retreating in chaos. On Earth, the news was met with both fear and pride. People gathered in the streets watching the broadcast. No one cheered the deaths, but they understood. Humanity had finally said no. For too long, they had been the galaxy's workhorses, the convenient allies, the ones to clean up the mess. That era was over. The Council was shaken. They had underestimated humanity again. They thought humans were emotional, impulsive, fragile. Instead, they saw coordination, precision, and resolve. Even after victory, the human fleet did not pursue. They transmitted a message to every world. Humanity sought peace, but it would not accept chains. The words echoed across 1,000 systems, and for the first time, other races began to listen. Some saw hope, others fear, but everyone knew the balance had shifted. Back on Earth, Laura sat in her office watching the stars from her window. She knew there was no turning back now. The Council would retaliate and more would die. But there was also something new, a unity that had never existed before. She remembered Daniel Brooks, the man whose death had sparked all this, and whispered that his sacrifice would not be in vain. In the darkness of space, the Liberty Dawn drifted in silence after the battle. Captain Aaron stood on the bridge looking at the broken hulls of the Council fleet. His crew worked quietly, tired but steady. They had defended their home, but he knew this was only the beginning. Across the galaxy, old powers stirred, old hatreds woke. Yet there was also respect now. The humans had proven that they were not to be ordered around, not to be silenced. Somewhere far away, deep in Council territory, a private message was sent from a small, neutral world. It was a single line: "We stand with humanity." And so it began, the slow turning of the tide, as one by one, species who had been silent under the Council's rule began to question their masters. The stars, once quiet and cold, now whispered with talk of rebellion and change. And in the heart of it all, humanity stood ready, not as conquerors but as equals demanding their place among the stars. The days after the first battle were filled with confusion. Across the galaxy, and the Council halls turned into a storm of arguments and fear, as no one had ever seen a united human fleet strike so fast and so clean, and it terrified them because the power they thought they controlled had now broken free and the illusion of peace was gone. The Council sent more fleets and more words of condemnation, but humanity ignored every order because they knew those words were hollow. The people of Earth were not celebrating but rebuilding and preparing. Factories ran day and night building ships and defense satellites while engineers worked on new drives and weapons that could match anything the Council could throw at them. In the shipyards of Luna, Captain Aaron Blake watched as damaged ships returned one by one, and he spoke to his crew not as soldiers, but as brothers and sisters in arms who all knew that they were no longer fighting just for territory, but for dignity. Laura Bennett spent her days in the underground halls of the new Human Alliance Command Center, where messages from distant colonies came every hour, and most were short promises of loyalty and readiness. Even small colonies that had barely survived under Council taxes now sent everything they could spare, from ore to fuel to ships. It was not about orders anymore. It was about belief. Humanity had become something the Council could never understand. A people united by injustice rather than control. On the Council homeworld of Elthar Prime, the chamber was filled with tension as ambassadors argued over who was responsible for the crisis. The Therax Dominion demanded vengeance while the Serathi urged diplomacy. But both sides knew the truth that humanity was not the same species that first came begging for membership centuries ago. They had learned too much, adapted too quickly, and now the ancient order trembled. The Grand Speaker of the Council, a tall being covered in silver scales, stood before them and declared that humanity must be brought back into the fold by any means necessary. It was not about justice but control. because the Council had built its empire on balance, and if one race refused to obey, others would follow. Orders went out for an armada to gather at the edge of Council space, a fleet of hundreds of ships from different worlds, and its purpose was clear. Far away in the shipyards of Mars, a new class of human ship was being finished. It was called the Vanguard, and it was not a warship in name but in spirit. It carried no markings of peace and no insignia of the Council. It was built to fight, to endure, and to remind the stars that humanity was not weak. Engineers slept on the decks, workers lived in their stations, and everyone worked with quiet purpose. Aaron visited Mars to oversee the launch, and as he stood beneath the red sky watching the massive ship rise from the docks, he felt both pride and sadness. He knew every new ship meant more lives at risk, but he also knew there was no choice left. Beside him stood Admiral Scott Hayes, a man hardened by decades of service. Scott said they would not start this war, but they would finish it. Aaron nodded, knowing the words were true. Meanwhile, on the colony world of Arcadia, a young woman named Nora Price led a small team of scouts beyond the system borders. She was not a soldier by training, but an explorer, one of the few who had mapped unknown regions before the embargo. Her mission now was to locate possible allies, species that might secretly support humanity. The Council's shadow reached far, but there were many who lived under its weight and longed for freedom. Nora's small ship, the Meridian, moved silently through uncharted space, sending coded messages and finding whispers of rebellion. On one small moon, she met a group of traders who claimed that entire systems were ready to rise if humanity showed they could win. She recorded their words and sent them back through encrypted channels, knowing that every ally mattered. Back on Earth, President Ellen Ward met with her advisors in a secure chamber deep under the Capitol dome. Reports came in of the Council fleet massing near the outer rim, a fleet so large that even the oldest wars could not compare. Ellen listened quietly, and then turned to Laura, asking if the Council had responded to their peace offers. Laura shook her head and said the Council did not want peace, they wanted obedience. Ellen sighed and looked at the map of human space where hundreds of colonies glowed like stars. She said if they wanted obedience, they would have to fight for it, and humanity would make them pay for every inch. When the Council Armada finally entered the outer systems, it moved like a storm. Dozens of worlds went dark as communication relays were destroyed. The human defense fleets fell back, not because they were losing, but because they were drawing the enemy in. Aaron commanded from the Vanguard, coordinating movements with precision. He used tactics the Council had never seen. Fast jumps, silent attacks, coordinated decoys that split the larger fleet apart. Every move showed that humanity had studied their enemies for years and learned every weakness. The first major clash happened near the colony of Haven Reach, where the Council fleet expected an easy victory. Instead, they found mines hidden in asteroid belts, automated turrets disguised as cargo drones, and fighters that used debris for cover. The battle lasted 12 hours and ended with half the Council fleet in ruins. Aaron watched from the bridge as the last of the enemy ships retreated into hyperspace, and he knew this was more than a win. It was a message. Across the galaxy, news spread faster than light through the networks. Species that had once feared the Council now began to speak quietly of the humans. Some saw them as dangerous, others as inspiring. On worlds under heavy Council taxes, protests began. On planets that had been ignored by the ruling elite, people whispered that maybe the humans were right. The Council tried to suppress the news, but it was too late. The image of human ships standing against the Armada was everywhere. In the days that followed, humanity prepared for the next move. Scientists on Europa developed new shielding technology. Miners on Titan provided rare metals for armor, and children on distant colonies wrote messages to the soldiers fighting among the stars. It was no longer just a war. It was a movement. Humanity had finally found its voice, and it echoed across the galaxy like thunder. The Council gathered again on Elthar Prime, furious and desperate. The Therax Dominion demanded total war, but others hesitated. Some began to question if the humans could truly be defeated. The Grand Speaker tried to restore order, warning that if the Council fell, chaos would consume the galaxy. But the words sounded hollow even to their own ears. Too many had seen the cracks. Too many had felt the shift. Laura stood once more in the human command chamber, reading the latest reports. The Council was fracturing, and small rebellions were starting on its edges. She felt a strange mix of hope and fear. This was what humanity had wanted, freedom and respect, but it came at a cost. Every victory meant more lives lost, and she carried that weight silently. She closed her eyes and whispered that they had to hold on, not just for themselves, but for everyone who had ever been silenced by the Council. In the blackness of space, the Vanguard drifted quietly, its hull scarred but strong. Aaron watched the stars through the viewport and thought about Earth, about the people who still believed in peace even while war raged. He promised himself that when it was over, if it ever ended, he would return home and see the oceans again. But for now, he had a duty. The next transmission came in, coded and urgent. New enemy fleets were on the move. Aaron turned to his crew and gave a single command to prepare for jump. As the engines roared to life, the stars stretched into lines, and humanity's defenders vanished into the void once more, ready to face whatever came next because they were done kneeling, done waiting, done being told what they could become. And in that moment, the galaxy began to realize that this war was no longer about power, but about survival, and humanity had no intention of losing it. The war spread across the stars like fire through dry grass, and no one could stop it anymore because every choice made by the Council only pushed more people to humanity's side, and every world that saw human ships fight began to see that the Council was not a symbol of peace but of control. On Earth, the people watched the reports of new battles every day, and though they feared for their loved ones, they did not break because they knew this fight was not only for them, but for every voice the Council had silenced. Factories on every planet kept running without rest, and workers built ships faster than ever before, while children painted flags on walls and dreamed of a day when the stars would be free again. President Ellen Ward stood before the Global Council of Earth and said that the time for defense was ending, and that humanity must now take the fight to the ones who had ruled them for centuries. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were hard because she knew what it meant. At the same time, Laura Bennett worked day and night in the Human Alliance Command Center, managing countless reports from colonies and fleets, and though she was tired, her focus never failed. She spoke daily with Captain Aaron Blake, who now led the main human fleet deep near Council territory. They both knew that the Council was planning something massive because their fleets were moving in strange patterns, as if preparing for a single crushing strike. Aaron had seen enough wars to recognize it, and he told Laura that they had to strike first or be destroyed. She agreed, but warned that Earth's resources were stretched thin, and they could not afford a long war. Aaron smiled faintly and said that sometimes the best way to win was to end it before it began. While the fleets moved in silence through the void, small acts of rebellion began to rise across the galaxy. On a mining world under Council control, the workers refused to send tribute shipments, and when soldiers came to punish them, they found that the miners had been supplied with human-made weapons hidden in old cargo crates. On another planet, a group of alien leaders declared their independence and broadcast the human message of freedom across their networks before the Council jammed the signal. The fire of rebellion had started, and it would not go out easily. Meanwhile, on the human colony of Arcadia, Nora Price returned from her secret mission with news that could change everything. She had found a species known as the Hithari, who lived far beyond Council space and had long stayed hidden to avoid the politics of the galaxy. They were powerful but peaceful until the Council destroyed one of their moons decades ago to stop their expansion. Nora met with their elders and told them what humanity was fighting for. The Hithari had listened in silence, and when she left, they gave her a single message to take back to Earth, a promise that if humanity fought for freedom, they would not stand alone. When Nora's ship reached Mars, she was met by Admiral Scott Hayes, and she handed him the data crystal containing the Hithari's message. Scott sent it directly to President Ellen, and for the first time in months, there was hope that help might come from beyond the known stars. The Council was not blind to these changes. On Elthar Prime, the Grand Speaker held a secret meeting with the Therax Dominion warlords, and they planned to unleash a weapon that had been hidden for centuries. It was called the Shroud, an energy network that could shut down technology across entire systems. They believed if they could disable human fleets and cut communication, the rebellion would collapse. It was their last resort, but desperation had made them reckless. Preparations began in silence while the Council pretended to call for peace talks. They sent a message to Earth offering negotiation and a ceasefire. Laura received the message first and brought it to President Ellen, who listened quietly. Laura said it could be a trap, but Ellen said they could not ignore the chance even if it was false. They decided to send a small delegation to meet the council halfway at a neutral station near the border. Laura would lead the team herself, knowing it might be the most dangerous mission of her life. Erin wanted to send escorts, but she refused, saying that peace required at least one gesture of trust. She boarded the diplomatic ship Horizon and left Earth under the eyes of billions who watched in silence. When the Horizon arrived at the meeting point, it found the council delegation already waiting. The Grand Speaker appeared through the holo-display and greeted Laura with a voice full of false warmth. He said that the council wished for peace, but only if humanity returned to the old laws. Laura answered calmly that humanity would never kneel again. The Grand Speaker's smile faded and he gave a signal. At that moment, the shroud was activated. Across space, hundreds of human ships suddenly went dark as energy fields collapsed and systems failed. The Horizon trembled and alarms filled the cabin as the power core shut down. Laura realized it was a trap. She ordered her crew to broadcast a warning, but communication was dead. On the Vanguard, Aaron saw his screens flicker and go black. His ship drifted without power for several minutes, and he felt a cold anger rise in his chest. The Council had not only broken faith, but had tried to destroy them all at once. Slowly, backup systems came online thanks to emergency protocols designed by human engineers who had always prepared for the worst. Aaron's crew cheered as power returned, and he ordered immediate scans to locate Laura's ship. The Vanguard jumped toward the signal beacon and found the Horizon adrift near a dying star. They rescued the survivors, but Laura was not among them. She had stayed behind to keep the Council's attention long enough for her crew to escape. When Aaron reported the loss to Earth, silence filled the command center. Ellen closed her eyes and said that the Council had chosen their fate. She gave the final order for total retaliation. Within hours, every human fleet mobilized. The Hethari received the distress signal and joined the war. Massive ships shaped like crystal spires emerged from deep space and struck at Council communication relays. The Shroud network began to collapse as its control stations were destroyed one by one. Humanity and its new allies advanced in unison, pushing deeper into enemy territory. The battles that followed were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Vanguard led the main strike while smaller fleets attacked from every side. Human pilots flew through impossible maneuvers, their ships moving like living things. The Council armadas fought back fiercely, but their coordination broke as their systems failed. The war that had begun with fear was now pure chaos. On one Council world, the people themselves rose against their rulers and opened their defense shields to let human ships land peacefully. They did not see humanity as invaders but as liberators. As the Council's forces crumbled, the Grand Speaker fled to a fortress world deep in the core systems. He sent one last message to all Council members, blaming humanity for the destruction of order, but by then few listened. The great powers that had once controlled everything were now begging for survival. The stars that had shone under the Council's rule for centuries now burned with rebellion. Aaron stood on the bridge of the Vanguard watching the distant explosions fade into the darkness. He thought of Laura, of her quiet courage, and felt both grief and pride. He knew this victory would not bring peace immediately, but it would bring something greater: freedom. On Earth, Ellen gave a speech broadcast across every colony and every allied world. She said that humanity did not fight for conquest but for the right to stand as equals. Her words echoed through space and found willing hearts everywhere. In the quiet after the battle, the Vanguard drifted among the ruins of the last Council stronghold. Aaron looked at the stars and whispered that this was only the beginning, because true peace would come only when every world was free to choose its own destiny. And somewhere far beyond the edge of known space, the Hethari leader watched the transmission and said that the humans had done what no one else dared. They had made the galaxy remember what courage meant. The galaxy had changed so fast that even those who had lived through centuries of calm could not understand how everything they knew was gone, because the Council that once ruled every system with quiet authority had now become a shadow of fear hiding behind broken fleets and ruined worlds, and humanity had become the symbol of resistance for every race that had ever been silenced. On Earth, people worked without rest rebuilding cities and stations damaged by war. And though the cost was high, the spirit was unbroken, because every person knew that they were part of something greater than survival. President Ellen Ward spent her days in long meetings with commanders and ambassadors trying to hold together the growing alliance that now stretched across hundreds of systems. Because when freedom came, it brought new challenges and new voices, all demanding to be heard. The HFY who had joined the war were powerful and wise but cautious, and they warned that even if the council was defeated, the galaxy could still fall into chaos if no one guided the change. Ellen listened carefully because she knew they were right. Humanity had fought for freedom, not control, but without leadership, the peace they wanted could crumble before it began. Admiral Scott Hayes met with Captain Aaron Blake on the bridge of the Vanguard as the fleet drifted near the edge of the old council core. The stars around them were quiet but filled with wreckage of old battles and broken stations. Aaron said that the council was finished, but Scott shook his head and said that the Grand Speaker had escaped again and that there were still loyal forces hiding in deep space. He said the war was not over until the council surrendered fully or was gone forever. Aaron understood and ordered his crew to prepare for the next phase. He missed Laura Bennett more than he could admit because she had been the heart of their cause, and though her loss still hurt, he carried her memory as a promise that what they built would not be destroyed by revenge. Far across the stars, on a world once ruled by the council, a young boy named Leon watched human soldiers helping rebuild his city. He was from a race that had been forced into labor for generations, and he could hardly believe that the humans who had once been strangers now shared food and water with his people. His mother told him that freedom was not just about fighting, but about kindness, and he saw it in the smiles of the workers who never treated them as less. These small moments began to change how others saw humanity. The galaxy that once feared them now started to respect them, not for their weapons, but for their compassion. In the ruins of Elthar Prime, the Grand Speaker held his last meeting with the remaining council leaders. The great chamber that had once echoed with pride now smelled of smoke and dust. He told them that humanity had poisoned the galaxy with rebellion, and that they had to strike back with whatever strength remained. But many of the old members refused. They said enough blood had been spilled and that the era of the council was over. Enraged, the Grand Speaker fled the planet with his loyal guards, taking a hidden ship toward the unknown, hoping to rebuild his power elsewhere. At the same time, Nora Price led a group of explorers to map the shattered regions near the core because humanity needed to know what was left. She had become a symbol of courage after her mission to the HFY, and she now worked to reconnect old trade routes and rescue stranded colonies. On one of her journeys, she discovered a small station filled with refugees from dozens of races who had fled the council's collapse. They had no supplies and no hope until her crew arrived. Nora spoke to them, simply telling them that they were not alone anymore and that the age of the council had ended. The refugees wept, and many of them later joined the rebuilding effort under the New Alliance banner. Back on Earth, President Ellen called a grand summit to form a new council, not of domination, but cooperation. Delegates from every free world gathered in orbit above the planet in a station called Unity. Ellen stood before them and said that humanity did not wish to rule, but to ensure that no race would ever again suffer under tyranny. Her speech was broadcast to every corner of known space, and for the first time the galaxy saw a leader who did not speak of power, but of trust. The HFY elder spoke next, saying that the humans had proven their courage, but now they must prove their wisdom. Everyone listened in silence because those words carried truth. Meanwhile, the remnants of the old council gathered forces on a hidden world called Varen, and from there they sent attacks against human convoys, hoping to reignite fear. Captain Aaron was ordered to lead a strike to eliminate the threat. The Vanguard and its escorts jumped through deep space, guided by faint energy signals. When they arrived, they found not a fleet but a trap. Hundreds of automated defense drones hidden under the planet's surface rose and opened fire. The sky lit up with streams of plasma, and the Vanguard shook under the impact. Aaron remained calm, directing his crew with precision. They used the gravity of the nearby moon to slingshot behind the drones and launched counterfire. The battle lasted for hours, and when it ended, the surface of Varan was silent. Aaron walked through the damaged corridors of his ship and thanked his crew because they had survived together. The destruction of Varan's defenses marked the end of organized resistance. Across the stars, messages of surrender came one by one. The Grand Speaker's ship was tracked and captured by a joint human and HFY task force. When he was brought before Ellen Ward on Earth, he showed no fear. He said that humanity would one day become like the council they destroyed because power always corrupts. Ellen looked at him calmly and said that maybe he was right, but that they would still choose to be different. The Grand Speaker was taken away and the war was finally over. Peace, however, was not simple. The Alliance struggled to manage hundreds of worlds with different needs and histories. Some planets wanted independence while others sought unity. Ellen worked tirelessly to balance their demands while sending aid and rebuilding fleets. Aaron and Scott helped train defense forces made up of mixed crews from many species. Nora became head of the Exploration Corps, leading missions beyond the known stars to search for new settlements and resources. For a while it seemed that hope had returned, but peace brought new worries. Old rivalries started to rise again as worlds competed for influence. Pirates and warlords appeared in the empty regions left by the fall of the Council. Ellen called another summit urging the Alliance to stay united. She said that they must remember why they fought, not for power but for respect. Her words reminded many of Laura Bennett, whose memory still inspired millions. In orbit above Earth, a monument was built in her name, a shining tower that faced the stars with the words, "We remember." One night Aaron stood on the deck of the Vanguard looking at that monument from space. He thought about all the people who had been lost and about the future they were trying to build. Scott joined him and said that wars are easy compared to peace, because peace demands patience and understanding. Aaron nodded and said that humanity would learn because they always did. They both watched as small ships from dozens of worlds moved together through the dark sky, carrying supplies to the colonies that needed them most. It was a sight neither man would ever forget. Far away in the outer rim, Nora's fleet found a strange signal coming from beyond mapped space. It was weak and old, but carried human code. When they traced it, they discovered a lost ship from the first era of human expansion, a ship that had vanished centuries ago, before humanity ever joined the Council. Inside were frozen logs describing a dream of reaching the stars to find friends, not masters. Nora smiled because it felt like destiny that the past had returned, just as the galaxy was finding its new beginning. As the years passed, the scars of war began to fade. Cities were rebuilt, trade returned, and for the first time in living memory there was no single ruler of the galaxy. Instead there was cooperation, fragile but real. Humanity had earned both respect and fear, but above all they had earned a voice that could no longer be silenced. The stars that once held their ancestors in wonder now carried their promise forward, and somewhere deep in the quiet of space the memory of all who had fallen seemed to whisper that the fight for freedom was worth every cost because it had given the galaxy something greater than peace. It had given it hope. Years passed and the galaxy began to settle into a fragile calm, but peace was never easy because, even though the old council was gone, the memory of its rule still lingered in the minds of many. And while most worlds had joined the new alliance, some were still uncertain about trusting humanity completely. On Earth, the skies were filled with ships again, not of war but of rebuilding and trade, and the people were learning what it meant to lead not by force but by example. President Ellen Ward had grown older and wiser, but she still worked every day to keep the alliance stable, because she knew that freedom was only the beginning and the real challenge was to hold it together. She often visited the memorial for Laura Bennett and placed a single white flower beneath her name, whispering that they had done what she dreamed of. Captain Aaron Blake remained in command of the Vanguard, though the great ship was now more a symbol than a weapon. He and Admiral Scott Hayes traveled between worlds, training new defense fleets made up of humans and allies together, because they wanted no one race to have power alone. Scott said it was strange to teach others how to fight when the goal was peace. But Aaron answered that peace without strength would never last. They both remembered the days when humanity had been ignored and treated as lesser, and they vowed that no world would ever feel that way again under the alliance. Nora Price had become one of the most respected explorers in known space, and her name was spoken with admiration among the colonies. She led expeditions beyond the edges of the mapped systems, and one day, she found a world so far away that its sun was barely visible in the charts. It was beautiful and untouched, covered in oceans and green land. She named it Horizon in honor of Laura Bennett's ship, and sent word to Earth that it could be the first shared colony of the Alliance where all species could live together. The idea spread quickly and thousands volunteered to help build it. Ships from every corner of the Alliance carried workers, families, and supplies to the new Sholtute. When President Ellen visited Horizon, for the first time she stood on the beach surrounded by people of many races, and said that this planet would stand as a promise that the galaxy could change. She said humanity had fought not for control but for a future where no one ruled over another. Her words were simple but powerful, and even those who had once feared humans felt respect. The Hithari elder who had supported them during the war placed his hand on her shoulder and said that humanity had brought light back to the stars. But peace was not perfect. In the shadows of the outer rim, small groups still called for the return of the old council order, claiming that the alliance was weak. Some pirate lords took advantage of the open routes between worlds, attacking trade convoys and spreading fear. Aaron was sent to lead a peacekeeping mission to that region. And though he wished to retire, he accepted, because he knew that peace required constant defense. The Vanguard once again moved through dark space, but this time its weapons stayed silent unless needed. Aaron spoke to his crew, reminding them that they were not conquerors but guardians, and his words filled them with pride. During one mission, they discovered a pirate fleet hiding near a dying star. The leader was a human named Cole Mercer, who had once been a soldier during the war but now believed the alliance was a mistake. He said that humans should rule because they were the strongest. Aaron tried to reason with him, but Cole refused and attacked. The battle that followed was short but painful, because it was the first time humans had fought humans since the Council's fall. When it ended, Aaron ordered that the survivors be treated and not punished, saying that the war was over and they must learn again to forgive. The event shook the alliance and reminded everyone that peace was fragile. President Ellen called for a new council meeting and spoke to all members through a galactic broadcast. She said that unity was not about agreeing on everything, but about never returning to chains and fear. Her voice was tired but firm, and when she finished, there was silence followed by thousands of voices across the stars, swearing to protect what they had built. Nora returned from Horizon to attend the ceremony marking the 5th year of the Alliance. She met Aaron and Scott at the gathering, and together they walked through the hall lined with flags from every world. They talked about how far they had come and how much had been lost along the way. Scott said that sometimes he still woke up hearing the sounds of battle, but Aaron told him that peace too has its sound if one listens long enough. They laughed softly because it felt strange to talk about peace after so many years of war. Later that night, Ellen joined them, and together they watched the stars from the balcony of the Unity Station. She said that humanity had proven something no one else believed possible, that courage and compassion could exist together. She looked at Aaron and said that his name and Laura's would be remembered in every generation to come. Aaron simply said that it had been worth it, because the galaxy was finally free. Far beyond the Alliance borders, deep in the dark region once controlled by the old Council, a faint signal began to transmit. It was weak but carried an old code known only to the Council's secret archives. A group of explorers picked it up and sent it to headquarters. When the message was decoded, it revealed a distress call from a ship carrying remnants of the Council leadership. They were stranded but alive. The Alliance debated whether to help them or ignore it. Ellen said that they must send aid because mercy would show the galaxy that they were different. Aaron agreed and took a small fleet to rescue them. When they arrived, they found a broken ship adrift near a dead sun. The survivors were starving and terrified. Among them was the former Grand Speaker who once ruled everything. Aaron looked at him and said that the war was over and that no one deserved to die forgotten in the dark. The Grand Speaker stared in disbelief and said that humanity had truly changed. They brought the survivors back to Earth, where they were placed under watch but treated with fairness. News of the rescue spread quickly, and many, who still doubted humanity's intentions, finally understood that this new order was not built on revenge. Across the stars there was a sense of relief. The alliance began to grow stronger as more worlds joined willingly. Trade routes reopened and ships from distant civilizations came to Horizon to learn from one another. The planet became a symbol of peace where children of many races played together under the same sun. Years later, President Ellen stepped down from her role and the new council elected representatives from different worlds to lead together. Humanity no longer stood above others but beside them as equals. Ellen retired to Horizon, where she lived quietly near the ocean. Sometimes she would sit and watch the waves, remembering everything they had endured. Nora often visited her, bringing stories from new discoveries beyond the rim. Aaron too came once in a while, his hair now gray but his eyes still sharp. They would talk about Laura Bennett and the days of struggle and laugh, softly, because even in those dark times they had believed they could win. One evening, as the sun set over Horizon, Aaron stood alone on a cliff looking at the stars. He thought of Earth, of the wars, and of the faces of those who had given everything. He knew that nothing was perfect and that new challenges would always come, but he also knew that humanity had found something worth keeping. The alliance was not built on fear or control, but on the simple truth that freedom was a choice made every day by people who refused to forget where they came from. In the years that followed the story of humanity's rebellion became legend told across worlds in 1,000 different ways, but always with the same message that even when the galaxy turned against them, they did not break. They had been underestimated, tested, and betrayed, yet they rose again and changed the stars forever. The monuments on Earth and horizon stood as quiet reminders that peace is not given but earned. And as the night fell and the stars shimmered, above the endless sea the wind carried a whisper across the water saying that the galaxy would never forget. The day humanity finally snapped, and the day they taught the universe what it truly meant to be free.